I never thought my life would unravel the way it did. Looking back now, it feels as though every single warning sign was flashing, every little piece of tension building towards something inevitable. But I was too blind or too hopeful to see it coming. What began as subtle friction in the household, the small arguments, the quiet rebellion, turned into a storm that would change everything in a single night. That night, my daughter stole my wife's car, and what followed became a chain of events that I can never forget. From the outside, we probably looked like a normal family, a decent home, a steady income, the usual struggles that come with marriage, with raising a teenager. But behind closed doors, we were far from peaceful. My daughter had always been strong-willed, sharp-tongued, and restless. Some parents call it independence. I used to call it stubbornness. She had this fire in her that seemed to grow hotter with every year, and by the time she was old enough to drive, that fire was burning out of control. The car was more than just a vehicle, it was my wife's pride, her sense of stability, the one thing she cared for almost obsessively, a sleek, polished machine that she treated like it was part of the family itself. Every Saturday morning, she would wash it, wipe down the seats, keep it spotless inside and out. She called it her sanctuary on wheels. To her, it was a symbol of how far we had come, proof that we had built something for ourselves out of the chaos of life. To my daughter, though, that car was a cage. She hated the rules, the boundaries, the constant reminders that she wasn't allowed to touch it, to take it out, to even think about driving it until she had earned the privilege. Every time my wife locked the keys away, I could see the resentment building in her eyes. I could see it, but I didn't do enough to stop it. Maybe part of me believed that rebellion was natural, that she would outgrow it. Maybe I underestimated just how desperate she was to break free. That night was ordinary in every way, until it wasn't. Dinner had been quiet, the air thick with unspoken tension. My daughter barely touched her food. My wife made the usual comments about responsibility, about focus, about how she was worried about the path our daughter was taking. I sat there in the middle, the unwilling referee in a war that had no clear winner. When my daughter stormed off to her room, slamming the door so hard the walls shook, I told myself it was just another teenage outburst. But an hour later, when I heard the unmistakable roar of the engine outside, my stomach dropped. At first, I thought maybe my wife had decided to go for a late-night drive. But when I looked out the window and saw the taillights disappearing down the street, I knew. My daughter had taken the keys, she had taken the car. The panic that surged through me was indescribable. My first instinct was denial. Maybe she was just moving it. Maybe she was joking. But deep down, I knew this was different. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a small act of defiance. This was her way of screaming into the night that she refused to be trapped any longer. I remember the silence in the house as I stood frozen by the window. My wife's face drained of color when she realized what had happened. She muttered something under her breath. Words I couldn't even process. All I could feel was the thundering of my heartbeat, the sickening realization that the fragile structure of our family had just cracked wide open. We called the police. Of course we did. What else could we do? A teenage girl out on the road with a car she wasn't supposed to be driving. Reckless and angry. It was a disaster waiting to happen. As I spoke to the dispatcher, my voice trembling, I couldn't stop picturing her behind the wheel, her hands gripping too tight, her eyes wild with defiance. I imagined every possible outcome, every terrible scenario, and none of them ended well. It didn't take long before the police spotted her. I'll never forget the sound of the sirens in the distance, faint at first, then growing louder. The dispatcher on the phone kept assuring me they had her in sight, that they were trying to get her to pull over, but my mind was already spiraling into 1,000 dark places. The thought of my daughter, my little girl, being chased by flashing lights and roaring engines, it was too much to bear. I kept thinking about how quickly these things could escalate, how fast a simple stop could turn into a chase, how easily a chase could end in tragedy, and I couldn't shake the gnawing guilt that somehow, this was my fault, that if I had done more, if I had been a better father, maybe she wouldn't have felt the need to rebel like this. The police told us to stay home, to wait, that they were handling it, but how could I sit still when every second felt like a countdown to disaster? I paced the living room, my hands trembling, my mind racing through memories of her childhood, of the little girl who used to climb onto my shoulders, who used to laugh at the simplest things. Where had that little girl gone? How had we let her slip so far away? I wanted to believe she would stop, that she would hear the sirens, see the flashing lights, and come to her senses, but deep down, I knew my daughter too well. Stubbornness had always been her defining trait, and once she set her mind to something, there was no turning back. The more the police pressed her, the more determined she would be to outrun them. Minutes felt like hours as we waited for news. My wife sat on the couch, her face buried in her hands, whispering to herself over and over. I couldn't tell if she was praying or cursing, maybe both. I wanted to comfort her, to promise her everything would be okay, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't believe them myself. And then the call came. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that made my stomach twist. They told us she was refusing to stop, that the chase was still ongoing, that they were doing everything they could to bring it to a safe conclusion. Safe. The word felt hollow. How could anything about this be safe? I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the updates, my mind trapped between past and present. Every memory of my daughter collided with the image of her speeding down dark streets, a wall of sirens at her back. I thought about the times I had scolded her, the times I had ignored her cries for freedom, the times I had chosen silence instead of understanding. Now, silence was all I had. The police said they were trying to box her in, to force her to slow down,